look into your word this morning, I pray, Father, that you would just take this flesh and, Lord, help me to bring out that you would have to be brought out. Lord, to give this people that you would have them to receive. Lord, help us each to open our hearts and minds to receive what it is that you have for us this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Exodus chapter 17, beginning of verse 1. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin, after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, and said, Give us water, that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water. And the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us, and our children, and our cattle with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smotest the river, take in thine hand, and go. Behold, I will stand before thee, there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. I'm going to stop reading there, and I want to jump over to the book of Numbers, chapter 20. Numbers chapter 20, beginning of verse 7. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water. And thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, so thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord, as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, Because ye believe me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. I'm going to stop reading there. We're going to go to one more place. Book of 1 Corinthians in chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning at verse 1. Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. I'm going to stop reading there, and I want to back up to where we started, and a few things I want to try to bring out. There's so much in all of this. I could probably give you 20 sermons on this. You pray for me that the Lord will focus my mind and I can bring forth this morning what he would have me to bring forth. Back to Exodus in chapter 17, where we read there that the congregation of the children of Israel had journeyed from the wilderness of Sin, and after journeys they were thirsty and there was nothing there to drink, and they began to get on to Moses to give them something to drink. A couple things that I want to bring out here before we get into the meat of what it is that God would have me to give to you this morning. If you would continue reading over in 1 Corinthians, where I read what Paul said about that rock is Christ, if you were to continue reading in there, you would also read that Paul said everything that happened to them was for our example. so that we would learn from them, so that we would not fall after this example of unbelief that they fell under. So everything that happened to the children of Israel, we're to look at and learn from, so that we don't do the very same thing. You can also see it if you're a Bible student, if you study the Bible, if you get in and you begin to read, you can also receive a mirror image when you look at Israel and you look at the church. The things that happened to Israel in the physical happened to the church in the spiritual. And you kind of put all this together in your mind, and I want you to look at these scriptures. I want you to understand a few things. It says that the children of Israel have wandered through the wilderness, and they came out of the wilderness of sin. Each and every one of you who's been born again have wandered in a wilderness, and that wilderness was sin that you wandered through. And you came through that wilderness, and as the children of Israel came out of that wilderness, there was a longing in them. There was a craving in them. There was a desire in them for something. What was that something that they were desiring? It was water. What is water? It is life. They came out of this wilderness of sin, and they felt as if they were going to die, and they needed life, and the life was in that water. I want to tell you, as a child of God, after you wandered in sin, you got to a point where you were seeking life. You were seeking what it is that your soul craved after, what it is that you desired, and that was that water that would give you life. And we all know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Jesus is the water of life. And listen, Jesus is the rock. And it says that when they came out of there, they were seeking out water. How did they get that water? God told Moses to go to that rock and to smite that rock. And out of that rock would come forth water. And then the children of Israel could drink that water and they would live. But I want you to notice here, the rock had to be smote. And it's the same in our case. Whenever we in the spiritual were wandering through the wilderness of sin, and we came to that point where we began to crave life, we began to crave something more. Where did that have to come from? It had to come from the rock. But in order for us to receive it from the rock, Jesus Christ, had to be smote. He was smote on that cross. And once he was smote on that cross, what flowed forth from him? Everything we need for life came forth from him. And we receive it because he was smote. One more thing I want to throw in here. You'll notice in both of these scriptures that we read, God said to Moses, take that rod. Why did he tell him to take that rod? If you go way back at when God called Moses out of the wilderness, and God appeared to him in the burning bush, and Moses approached that burning bush, and God spoke to him. He said to Moses, what is that in thy hand? It was the rod that he had in his hand. And he said, throw it down, and it turned into a serpent. And what is it about that rod? God used that rod to cause Moses to believe. It became an object of faith. It was the faith. God said to Moses, take the faith. You've got to believe that when you come to this rock and the rock is smote, that life will come forth from the rock. It's the same in our spiritual. We have to have the faith to believe once he was smote on there, that what come forth would give us life. We have to have that faith to believe that and to understand that. I believe, I don't know your hearts, God knows your heart, but I believe those of you sitting here have been born again. So you have done that. You have taken your faith and applied it to where the rock was smote on the cross, and you received what came forth from him, which was life. You traveled through that wilderness just as the children of Israel did. You came out of sin and you came to the rock, and you used your faith to receive what came forth from the rock in order that you could have life. And we go over to Numbers. This is another time where the children of Israel were in want, were in need, and they desired something. What was it that they desired? They desired water again. They desired that God would give them what it was that would sustain them, what it was that would keep them going. And again, God said to Moses, take your rod and go to the rock. Take your faith and go to the rock. Well, if you need something, after you have gotten to that point where you drank of the rock that gave you life, when you need sustenance, when you need strength, when you need something to sustain you, when you need something to keep you going, you got to take your faith and go back to the rock. But I want you to look at it this time. He didn't tell him to strike the rock. He told him to speak to the rock. But Moses struck the rock. I want you to really listen here to what God said. The Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron, because you believed me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. God told Moses to go and to speak to the rock. And Moses struck the rock. And when he struck the rock, God was good enough to still give the people the water. But listen to what he said to Moses. Because you believed me not. It doesn't really sound like Moses didn't believe him. It didn't really sound like Moses doubted God. Listen, Moses was upset with these people. He called them a bunch of rebels. They were getting on his nerves. You can understand why. Moses put up with these people for years and years and years and years and years, grumbling and complaining and moaning and groaning and getting on his nerves. How much stuff did he have to go through with these people? And it got on his nerves, and you can kind of understand that. And in that moment of his aggravation and his frustration, he struck the rock. But God said, because you didn't believe me and did not sanctify me before the children of Israel, you're not going into the promised land. Here's what I want you to get. This is what God has given me. This is what I want you to understand. You know, it required that at one time Christ had to be struck. Christ had to be smote. Christ had to go to the cross. That had to happen in order for that water to flow forth from him. That would give us life. Something had to be done. There was a cost. There was a price that had to be paid. But I want you to understand this. When he did that, everything that you will ever need was paid for. There is nothing you can do to pay for it. You don't have what it takes to pay for it. Even if you have what it takes, you can't pay for it because it was already paid for. It was paid for there. Something had to be done. So the first time that they went to the rock, something had to be done to get it started. Something had to be done to give them the life that would come from the rock. But listen, after that, when they went back again and they needed to be sustained and they needed to be strengthened and they needed to be encouraged, they needed something that would keep them going. God said, just speak to the rock. There's nothing that they could do. There was nothing that they had to do. There was nothing that could be done in order for God to give to them from that point forward. And it's the same with us. There are people who will say, well, what do I got to do to get God to answer me? What do I got to do in order for this to happen? What do I got to do in order for God to answer my prayer or meet my need or whatever it is? There's nothing you can do. There's only one thing that God asks of you to do. Speak to the rock. So many are teaching and so many are preaching and so many are putting forth out there. You know, if you give, then this will be given unto you. If you do what is required in our church bylaws, then God will bless you. If you give your 10%, then you will be blessed. You can't buy anything from God. Jesus did everything that needed to be done right there. Nothing more can be done. God is not asking you to do anything. Listen, these children of Israel, I told you, Moses called them a bunch of rebels. They were a pain in his backside. They were always mumbling and grumbling and complaining. They were never happy. They were never satisfied. But yet God said, if you ask of the rock, if you speak to the rock, he will still give them what they need. God knows what you are. God knows how you are. But what does God say to you? Just speak to the rock. But you got to take your rod with you. Do you believe that all I got to do is go to Jesus and say, I need a drink? Or do you believe, well, I messed up this week, so he ain't going to answer me. I'm not doing everything exactly right, so he ain't going to answer me.
I just don't have enough money. I can't pay 10%, so he ain't going to answer me. Do you believe that, or do you believe if I go to the rock with my rod in my hand and I speak to the rock, it will bring forth? Listen, Moses didn't get to go into the promised land because he didn't believe God. What? I made a big deal about this. It don't sound like he didn't believe him. But if you don't do what God says the way God says to do it, you're doubting God. You're not taking God at his word, following his word the way he said to do it. He said, you didn't believe me and sanctify me before the people. These people that are preaching and teaching are out there saying, if you give, then God gives. Plant your seed. And you know all the schmeal, you know all the stuff that's going on out there. They are not sanctifying God. They're teaching that you can buy something from God. They're teaching that God has a price that you must pay before God will do anything for you. I'm going to tell you something. The price was paid. The price was paid a long time ago. Everything that needed to be done was done when that rock was smote on the first time. And out of him flowed everything that you would ever need. And from that point forward, what did he say you got to do? Speak to the rock. Go to Christ. If you can only take your rod, you've got to take your rod. You've got to believe that what the Bible says is true. Somehow we get so caught up in all this stuff that I ain't good enough, I don't do enough, I don't pay enough, whatever it is, we get in our heads. We get all caught. You can't pay enough. I don't care if you're a quadrillionaire and you give every cent you've got. You can't buy anything from God. The price was already paid, and all the money in the world with all the gold and all the diamonds and all the precious jewels wouldn't be enough to do what was done on that cross. Amen. It wouldn't do it. The price was paid, and we got to get it out of our head. There's nothing that I can do that's going to win me enough favor with God that he's going to answer. There's nothing that I can be that's going to win me enough favor with God that he's going to answer. The only thing that God requires is when the rock was smote, I drank of that water. And from that point forward, when I need water, I speak to the rock. That's what's required. That's all that's required. Every stinking one of you sitting here will mess up. You have messed up. You're going to mess up again. You ain't going to never be perfect. You ain't never going to get it all figured out. And God knew that. And God said, all you got to do is speak to the rock. I don't already know what. Listen, I want to tell you something. I caught a little bit of this on the radio this morning. And God's bringing it back to my memory. Before anything was ever formed, God looked down through time, and God saw you, and God knew exactly what you are, and God knew exactly what you would do and what you would not do and how you would act, and all that. God knew all that before anything was created. That's right. Before you existed, before the world existed, he knew all that. But you know what? Even before you existed, he loved you so much. He said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and create the world anyway. I'm going to go ahead and put people on it anyway. I know all this is going to happen, but I'm going to go ahead and send my son anyway. Before any of that happened. Listen. In my human mind, if I was looking down through time and I wanted people to fellowship with and I wanted people to love me and worship me and be with me, and if I want all that and I can look down through time and see they're going to end up like this, I ain't doing it. Especially if I can look down through time, see they're going to end up like this, and the only thing that's going to fix it is sending my son to the cross, I ain't doing it. But you know what? When he did that, he knew those scriptures I read to you were going to happen. And I don't know how God works, and I can't comprehend the mind of God, but listen, he knew the children of Israel were going to go through all this. And he knew later his son would come and do what he did. So when the children of Israel did all this, he put his son in there. Do you see it? Way before anything ever. And why did he do all that? I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you. Because way before everything was created, he looked down through time, he saw me.
Amen. Thank you, Lord.
And he said, he ain't much,
Thank you, Jesus.
but I love him.
Thank you, Lord.
There's nothing he can do